Hi, I'm here to begin my Code Geass character ranking. Code Geass is such a wonderful show. It's my favorite anime, and it is currently my favorite show. It really does mean a lot to me, and there are so many great characters in Code Geass, and there are so many characters to talk about. For my ranking, I have 55 characters. I really wanted it to be a very thorough ranking, to have lots of characters. And there are some characters that could seem somewhat important that aren't here. I figured for characters that have almost no characterization that we know of, I feel like ranking them just doesn't feel like a great use of time. I feel like there'd be like a big group of characters where there wouldn't be much to say. There are certain members of the Black Knights that do have names, but they barely have any dialogue. They barely do huge plot stuff. We don't get to know a lot about their personality, so I feel like having about five or maybe even more members of the Black Knights, and for me to just go, well, they don't have a lot of personality. I guess this character is slightly better than this character. I feel like there wouldn't be much to say. There are some characters in my ranking that didn't get a lot to do, but they at least left somewhat of an impression. I feel like they at least did something that was either somewhat important or they had a decent amount of screen time. And I like most of the characters in Code Geass. Some of the characters aren't the best, and there are some characters that I overall don't like. I do think that the writing is so good in Code Geass that even the worst characters have a few moments and qualities that work. It's a very impressive anime, but there's definitely some characters that I don't have a very lovely opinion on. But there are a lot of characters in Code Geass that I really do love. In last place, in 55th place for me, is Rolo. Rolo is certainly my least favorite character in Code Geass, and I feel like Rolo didn't start off on a good note. Not being the most charismatic character, being kind of annoying, not really contributing a lot, and really getting in Lucia's way in a way that wasn't really that compelling. Rolo does something uh, later on in the season that was awful, that I think made him the definitive worst character in Code Geass, in my opinion. After that, it was hard for me to have any sort of great feelings about him. Rolo, even though I do think he's the worst Code Geass character, I do like his last scene. I do think it was a good end to his storyline and was the closest he came to being likable and compelling. So even the worst character in Code Geass has at least a little bit of good writing, but I still overall don't like the character. In 54th place is Kaguya, uh, a character that started off really annoying, and when she showed up, it started feeling uncomfortable with what she added, and what she added really didn't feel necessary to Code Geass, and it wasn't the type of comedy relief that really felt welcomed, in my opinion. Kaguya became a more tolerable and likable character towards the end of the show, but like with Rolo, it was too late, and even though it helped Kaguya a little bit and helped shows that even the worst Code Geass characters have some enjoyable qualities, it wasn't enough for her to be a good character, in my opinion. In 53rd place is Tamaki, a recurring comedy relief character that doesn't feel terribly necessary. He's occasionally amusing, but I think not enough for him to be around for so long. I feel like he should have just been quickly introduced as a sort of comedic character and then taken out of the plot. I feel like Zero should be keeping around the best members of the Black Knights, and it really feels like Tamaki was never that. It feels like he's just there for comedy relief, and even though he has occasionally amusing moments, he's not funny enough to keep around as a regular character, in my opinion. In 52nd place is Ribbles, and I feel similarly about him that I do to Tamaki, where he feels like a character that's mostly just there to be funny, and it feels like Ribbles is pretty pointless. No real huge contributions to the story, nothing really interesting. I guess he's slightly more important to Tamaki because of him giving rides to Lelouch, but I feel like Lelouch, if he just had his own ride, I feel like even then I could easily take Ribbles out of the plot, so even Ribbles' one purpose feels a little bit unnecessary. 51st place is cool. Code Geass has a lot of antagonists that are really compelling, really fascinating. Cool is very much the type of antagonist. It's pretty much there to be unlikable. Not a lot of characterization or nuance or even anything that entertaining. Really forgettable character in my opinion. 50th place is Kirihara. He is important, providing some support to Zero and the Black Knights, and he has a little bit of a backstory with Lelouch that's cool. He's just not a terribly interesting or exciting character. Feels like a character that's kind of there a lot of the time. Not terrible, but nothing too great. In 49th place is Sayako. She's the type of character that technically does help Lelouch out a lot, and she is likable. She's just not very interesting. There's not a lot of character to her. So even though she has some fun moments and some helpful moments, it's hard for me to ever get too attached to her character or even really think about her that often. In 48th place, character I don't know how to pronounce the name, but the woman that was hanging around Shinkai, um, she is pretty much a character that's kind of just there. She seems like a good friend to Shinkai, but outside of that, I feel like there's not a lot to her. She didn't get too much to do. 47th place, I feel like, is where I could be getting into the hot takes category. 47th place is Princess Euphemia. I think a lot of people would have Princess Euphemia in their top 20, maybe even top 10. I was never that big of a fan of her character. I feel like a lot of what makes Code Geass really interesting is seeing anti-heroes and villains that have some nuance to them competing, and there's very interesting arguments brought up, and particularly when it comes to the route between Lelouch and Suzaku. It could be like, who's the real hero, who's the real villain. There's lots of really interesting things to think about. I feel like Euphemia feels like she got in the way of things for a while, because there are some nice characters in Code Geass, but I feel like they usually don't interrupt what's going on, and I feel like Euphemia did that. I feel like she is too simple of a character to get involved in the big competing stuff between Zero and his corrupt family members, and between Zero and Suzaku and stuff like that. I feel like Euphemia is just a really uninteresting character, and I feel like I would have liked her more if she was kind of more on the sidelines. And I'm not a big fan of her relationship with Suzaku. Felt pretty rushed. Didn't feel too strong of a connection where I understand why they got attracted to each other. And I feel like it's not superficial or anything. I still feel like it didn't leave a huge impact. It led to Suzaku going down as a character, becoming less likable as the show went on. So I feel like Euphemia kind of hindered things rather than helped things, unfortunately. In 46th place is, I think, another big hot take, Nonali. She's incredibly important to the plot for being Lelouch's motivation for doing what he does, so she's very memorable and important in that sense, but when it comes to characters that I think about, for how exciting they are, well written, entertaining, all that kind of stuff, not only goes from being a memorable character for plot reasons to becoming forgettable in terms of being an interesting character. Like Euphemia, not only feels like a very bland character that makes things less interesting and makes Lucia's motivations less exciting. So I'm not a big fan of her character. So I started things off talking about the characters I'm not a big fan of, but moving forward, moving on to characters that are better. So that is really cool. You can let me know what you think of the ranking so far.